In this video, we are going to revise questions from Biology Paper 2 for the year 2017. This was written by the internals. Now let's dive in. Let's look at the first question. So figure 1.0 shows some specialized cells P, Q, and D, R. So a specialized cell is any cell that has its own function. So we have cell P, Q, and R. Now let's look at our first question here. Name each of the cells above. So the first one, let's name P. So P, because of this elongated outgrowth, or whenever you see an elongated outgrowth, you are dealing with what we call a root hair cell. Then for cell Q, we can see that it has a biconcave shape. So cells with a biconcave shape, here we are dealing with the red blood cells. And the other thing about this, we can see the shape that they are irregular in shape. This tells us that we are dealing with an animal cell, but for cell P and R, we can see the regularity. Thus, these two cells are from the plant cells. Now, let's look at cell R. So, cell R with the shape, and also we can see a lot of chloroplasts here. We are dealing with a palisade cell. Okay, now we can move on to B, Roman number 1. Set the functions of cells P and Q. So cell P, we said it is a root hair cell. So the function of a root hair cell is to absorb nutrients and water from the soil. Then for function of cell Q, these are red blood cells. So the function is to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. Then we can move on to Roman number 2, where we are told to explain the adaptation for cells P and Q to their function. So if we look at the adaptation, we are looking at the parts that are associated with each cell that helps or that makes it possible for each cell to function its particular function. Like if we look at cell P, we said it absorbs nutrients or mineral salts and water from the cell. Now, what structure from cell P that makes it able to absorb? So it is due to the presence of a root hair. So the O cell is known as a root hair cell, but this elongated structure here, this is what we call a root hair. And this root hair is its adaptation for its function. So we can say presence of root hair. Then we can move on to adaptation of cell Q. Q, we are saying, is a red blood cell, and transportation of oxygen and carbon dioxide is what we said is a function for cell Q. Now, since we need a certain space inside these cells, so because of this, or maybe we can say that cell Q has no nucleus to create more space for hemoglobin. Then inside the hemoglobin is where the carbon dioxide and the carbon dioxide and oxygen are transported. So say absence of nucleus to create more space for hemoglobin or for hemoglobin. Then we can move on to question C. Where in the leaf is cell R located? So we are trying to find the location in the leaf where cell R. So the palisade are located on the upper surface of them, just below after the epidermis. So we have the epidermis. Immediately after the epidermis layer, we have the the palisade. So we'll say below the epidermis layer. Okay, so these are the ways in which we can answer a question like this one. Now let's move on to question. Now here question 2 says figure 2.0 shows a graph showing the effect of temperature on an enzyme catalyzed reaction. So we have this graph. In the x-axis we have temperature in degrees Celsius. Then the y-axis is giving us the rate of a chemical reaction. Now let's look at question A, Roman number 1. What is an enzyme? So enzyme is a substance produced by a living organism that acts as a catalyst. So in actual sense, enzymes are not catalysts. They just act like a catalyst. So we'll say is a substance produced by a living organism which act like a catalyst. Okay, so now we can move on to Roman number 2. What is the optimum temperature of the enzyme reaction shown in the graph in figures 2.0? So the optimum we are saying is the temperature where the enzyme is operating effectively, or it is the best point. Beyond that, the enzyme becomes denatured. So the optimum temperature, it is at this point here. So this is where we have our optimum temperature. So we'll just follow this line here. Wherever we reach on the x-axis, it's the number that we are solving for. So here we can see that it is about 36 degrees Celsius. Then let's move on to B, Roman number 1. At what temperature in figure 2.0 is the enzyme completely denatured? So if we look at the denaturing, one of the characteristics for enzymes are, we say enzymes have a specific shape. Then if we look at the enzyme being denatured, we are saying the enzyme has changed its original shape in such a way that it can no longer fit its substrate. So we are looking at from this graph that we have here, at which point can we tell that here the enzyme is completely denatured. It has changed its original shape. So from this point here, the reaction is increasing, then here increasing, then we have here increasing. Then at this point, that is its base, which is the optimum. Then here we have the beyond optimum temperature. So now the enzyme has started changing the shape. Here it has started changing the shape. So as soon as the enzymes started changing its original shape, the reaction ceases to, or we can say started to slow down. So here the reaction is slowing down at this point where this line is touching the x-axis. Now we can see the completion. We can see the completion in denaturing. So we'll say this is in between 55 up to 60 here. So this is about we can say maybe 57 somewhere here. So 57 degrees Celsius. Now let's move on to Roman number 2. Give a reason for your answer in above. So the reason why we can say this is where there is a completion of denaturing of enzymes, because as long as the graph is touching the x-axis, it shows that the reaction has stopped. So we can defend our answers because this is where this is where the graph is touching the x-axis. The x-axis showing the stopping of the reaction. Then let's move on to see Roman number 1. Explain why it is important to measure the body temperature when a person is sick. So if you look at the mechanism of human bodies operates on the enzyme, or we can say human bodies operates on the metabolic reaction. And whenever we have a reaction, we need to have substances that are acting as catalysts. And in our bodies, we've said that the enzymes are there to act as catalysts. So when a person is sick, and for example, if the temperature is beyond the normal human temperature, the fear of that is that it may make the enzymes in the body of that particular person to be denatured. And if the enzymes stops working, then the metabolic reaction will stop working. After that, then the cells will start to die out. Then as a result, we are going to have that individual face the death. So the reason behind why they measure the temperature is to check if the temperature of that particular person is within the normal temperature for enzyme to operate effectively. So say to see if the temperature is within the operation of enzymes. So if we, for instance, they measure the temperature of a given person and they find that the temperature is above the normal temperature, maybe it's above 37 degrees Celsius, they have to find ways of reducing that temperature to normal. Why? If that temperature keeps on increasing, it will reach at a point where the enzymes will be denatured. As a result, then the life of that particular person is threatened. Then also the opposite is also true. If the temperature started to decrease beyond the normal temperature, the enzymes will become inactive. Whenever we have low temperature, the shape of the enzyme will remain the same, but the problem is they will be inactive. They stop, they will not work. So that will also result in a problem of that particular organism. Now, let's move on to Roman number 2, proposed ways the body temperature of a sick person can be brought down to normal. Okay, so 2 ways, by, we can say by giving him or her a lot of fluids. So this can help. Then also by giving him or her medications. So there are some of the medications that can help to reduce the temperature. Now we have some ideas of this. Let's move on to question 3. Now question 3 is talking about the life cycle of a mosquito. So we have figure 3.0 shows the life cycle of a mosquito. Then we have the 4 stages. Then under these 4 stages, there is the first one. You need to know that there is we need to have stage 1 where we have the eggs. After the eggs we have the larva. From the larva we have the pupa. Then from the pupa we have the adult. So let's say, or we can, if what, we can begin with the adult. Then we have the eggs. Then after the eggs we have the larva. From the larva we have the pupa. So one of the ways that can help you to recall the stages, the order of these 4 stages, is you just have to look at the alphabetical letters of each word. So from the adult we can say that we have A, then E, L, P. So this is the best way that can assist you to remember. Why? Sometimes you may remember the 4 stages, but you forgot. You may forget the order. Maybe you may have which one comes first before larva or pupa. So my advice is, if you are facing such a problem over this one, you can just look at the alphabetical. So you can just alphabetize these letters, then you are a good way to go. Now, after we've looked at this, the other thing that we can know about these 4 stages, the 4 stages, adults, eggs, larva, and pupa, tells us about the complete metamorphosis. So sometimes if you may encounter a question where you are asked to define or what the complete metamorphosis is. Complete metamorphosis is a life cycle of a given organism where all the 4 stages are there. Now, after we've looked at this, let's look at the first question here. So the first question is stage 4. We can see here we have the adult. So here we have the adult. Then stage 2, you can see that here we have eggs. Then stage 3, we have the larva. Then stage 4, we have the pupa. Now let's move on to Roman number 1. Identify 2 stages in figure 3.0 which are most suitable for eradicating malaria. So to eradicate means if we want to get rid of, or maybe if ways that we can use to alleviate malaria. So the best stages are stage 3 and 4. So stage 3 and stage 4. Why? Stage 1, we just have eggs here. It's hard to kill or remove the eggs. Then also at the larva stage here, it is also hard since its feeding process is hard to control. Now at stage 3, where we have the pupa, this one, it has now started feeding, like it's feeding on substances that are found in stagnant water. So it's easy to get rid of this. Why? We can just spray poisonous in stagnant water. Now let's look at Roman number 2. For each stage identify in A1 above, state how malaria may be eradicated. So for stage 3, we are looking at pupae here. So we can just say by spraying. By spraying. So poisonous substances or liquid in water. Then in stage 4, where we have an adult, we can just say here by spraying and by using a mosquito net. Then we move on to Roman number 3. Suggest 2 ways in which malaria can be controlled in the community. The same answers that we have given are ways that in which malaria can be controlled. So by using treated mosquitoes is one way. Then by cleaning our surroundings. By also, you can say by spraying in stagnant water, you make sure that you remove the stagnant water from where you live or stay. Then also by using mosquito repellent. These are ways in which we can control malaria. So for us to control malaria, we just have to control the mosquito. Why? A mosquito is a vector for malaria. Now let's move on to question B. What term is given to the mosquito based on the role in the transmission of malaria pathogen? So there is one thing that I would like to share with you. A mosquito does not cause malaria. Mosquito is just a vector. In biology, a vector is an organism that transmits or that helps the pathogens to move from one position to another position. So a mosquito is just there like a transmitter. Now the point is what term is given to the mosquito based on the role in the. So a mosquito is a vector. Now what kind of vector are we looking at? So this is what we call biological vector. A biological vector is the one that carries its pathogen inside the body. Like the pathogen for malaria is a plasmodium. The plasmodium is carried inside the body of a mosquito. But if you look at the pathogen for a disease like cholera, we have what we call cholera vibrio. That one is carried on the outside of the body or on the surface of the body of a housefly. Then that one is what we call mechanical vector. So the difference between a biological vector and a mechanical vector is a biological vector transmits its pathogen inside the body, while a mechanical vector transmits its pathogen outside the body or on the surface of the body. Now let's look at C, Roman number 1. We are taught to define pathogen. So a pathogen is any microorganism that has the ability to cause diseases. So pathogens now are the ones that causes diseases. So say is a microorganism. Okay, so that is the definition that we can give. So the key point is a pathogen is any microorganism as long as it has the ability to cause diseases. Now, the point under pathogens, pathogens were not meant or created to cause diseases. Their target, whenever a pathogen attacks or enters the body of an organism, or maybe let's take it for instance, we look at the pathogen that causes malaria. If it enters the body or our bodies, what is its target? So its target is just to feed. All it wants is just to feed and the host to live in. So the body of an, let's say, human being will be there to provide the food that that organism needs, then also the shelter that it needs for it to survive. Now, from that, benefiting from that is what now results in a disease. So that is what the key point is. So most of all can say all of these pathogens, their aim is not to cause disease. All they want is just an organism where they can feed on, also an organism where they can have the shelter. Then because of that feeding, or there is no that mutual interaction or sharing, we would find that one organism is benefiting more than the other. As the result, we have a disease. Now let's move on to Roman number 2 here. Name the malaria causing pathogen. So the one that causes the malaria is Plasmodium. Okay, now let's move on to question 4. Question 4, we have figure 4.0 shows the longitudinal section of a stem. Then my structure might not be clear, so I advise you use the actual paper for this here so that you are able to see. So maybe let me see if I can draw this structure. My interest is for ST and D and U. So under this one, this is what we call a dicot stem. These outside, these are known as the phloem. Then this one is the cambium. Then this inside we have the xylem. Now, from the clear picture or the paper that I'm using here, let's look at the first question. So question A, Roman number 1, which letters in figure 4.0 corresponds to cambium, xylem, and phloem? So cambium, according to my structure here, cambium is T. Then xylem, S. Phloem, U. Then let's move on to Roman number 2. Explain the functions of S and T in the plant. So functions of S, what is it? S is xylem. So xylem to transport mineral salts, and water. Then if you look at the functions of T, cambium will say to create new xylem and phloem cells, which results in secondary growth. So in terms of growth, we have two types of growth. There is primary growth and secondary growth. Now, primary growth deals with the increase in height in terms of the size, how high the tree or a plant is growing. Then if you look at the secondary growth, we are looking at the increase in girth, or we can say maybe width or the diameter of a plant. So this cambium here creates the new xylem. So whenever the new xylems and phloem cells are forming, then that will result in secondary. So we are going to have that increase in width or girth. Then B1, which letter corresponds to the structure which needs companion cells to function properly. So companion cells are cells that supply the energy that is needed for food to move by the process of translocation, and translocation occurs in phloem. So the structure for phloem is U. Then let's move on to Roman number 2. Which letter in figure 4.0 corresponds to a structure in which substances can either move up or down? So it's U. In phloem, substances, which is phloem, the function of phloem, it transports manufactured food. So manufactured food can go up or down depending on the need of the plant, or depending where the parts that needs food are located. But for a xylem, the xylem is a one direction movement. The xylem transports water and the mineral salts from where? From the soil, then direct to the leaves. So under the phloem here, we have a one route transportation. Now to wrap it all up, here we are looking at transportation and somehow growth. So whenever we look at transportation system in a plant is controlled by what we call a vascular system. The vascular system is a system that is made up of the first one, phloem, and we have said the phloem transports manufactured food. Then we have the xylem, transports water, and also the other function for xylem, apart from transportation, it also provides supports needed by the plant. Then also we have the cambium. So these are the three most important parts that are responsible for the transportation of materials in a plant. Okay, now let's move on to question 4. Now question 4, we are looking at a genetic question. Now let's look at this question. Mrs. Mumba delivered a baby girl in a certain hospital. Mrs. Mumba has the blood group O, and the father of the girl has blood group AB. Mrs. Mumba sues the hospital for giving her a wrong baby whose blood group was O. Explain using a genetic diagram why Mrs. Mumba would win or lose the case. Now there are some basics that I would like to share with you about blood groups. Sometimes you may even have the answer before you use the genetic diagram. By now you should be able to know that this if this case was to be taken, if it was just in reality, as long as the Mrs. Mumba has this blood group O and Mr. Mumba AB, therefore Mrs. Mumba would win this case. Why? There is a note that I want for you guys to see here. If you look at the phenotype for blood group, we begin with the phenotype for blood group A. AA is blood group A, but the term that we use for AA, we use this one as the homozygous. So whenever you hear homozygous, we are looking at having the same letters. Then this one is blood group A also, but this is heterozygous. Why? Because we have one allele for A and the other one for O. Now the other thing that you need to know about blood groups is O is recessive to A and B, meaning it doesn't have the ability to express itself whenever it is find itself with A or B. Then let's look at for B. So the B is also similar to A. B here, this one is homozygous for B, but blood group blood group B. Then this is Z, heterozygous for B, but the phenotype is still this person has blood group B. Then we will have blood group AB. Blood group AB is just like this. Now under this blood group AB, we refer this situation as the codominance. What is really meant by codominance? So codominance is a situation where two alleles are dominant and they want to express themselves. So here, A we want to express itself, B will also want to express itself. As the result, both A and B will express themselves. Then let's look at the blood group O. So the note that you need to know here is blood group O is just O. Whenever you hear that a person or a parent has blood group O, just know that you are going to have OO. Now, there is a note that I want you to take down here. Blood group, or we can say if one of the couple of the parents, if one of that has AA, BB, or AB, they cannot have a child with blood group O. If one of those two has AA, BB, or AB, they cannot have a child with blood group O. This is a note. I'm sure now you can see why this case Mrs. Mumba would win. Why? Blood group AB cannot have a child with blood group O. Now, if this is the case, now how can we have blood group O? Now, for a couple to have blood group O, at least each allele from the couple must have a O. The key point is, if we can say if let's say the husband has A, there should be O. Here we can have AO, BO, CO. OO. The key point is there should be at least one allele for O for that couple to have a child with O, so that when we make that genetic diagram, we are going to see that one O from the male side and the other O from the female side will combine to give us now OO. So that is the picture about blood group O. So we've shared some ideas. Now let's go back to our question. So we'll say we'll have here, we'll say Mr. Mumba. Then here we are going to have Mrs. Mumba. Now, Mr. Mumba, we know that we are told that Mr. Mumba has the blood group AB. Then Mrs. Mumba has blood group O. So here we are going to have OO. Then these are what we call genotype of first parental generation. Now, this genotype of P1 can also be written on the left side where there is Mr. Mumba. Now, after we've done this, also before I forget, the blood groups in terms of genetic diagram, let's say this AB can also be written as this. You can use this symbols code. So we have A and B. So the key point is, as long as you are understanding this, then the answer will be correct. Then from there we can now separate this. We have A, B here, O. So after we separate, now we'll consider this one as the gametes. So we are saying there is a chance that each gamete may have A, B, or O. Now let's draw this genetic diagram. So here we can see that this is showing us the chance of this couple having a child with blood group A who is heterozygous. Then let's look at this one. Even here, heterozygous for A. Here we have heterozygous for B. Here we have heterozygous for B. So these are now genotype of F1. So we can see that from these 4 chances, there is no chance for this couple to have a child with blood group O. So therefore, the statement that we can write here is, therefore, Mrs. Mumba would win the case because according to the genetic diagram, there was no chance for this couple, or there was no chance for Mr. Mumba and Mrs. Mumba to have a child with blood group O. So that is what we can write here. Okay, let's just write it. So we can say, therefore, Mrs. Mumba would win the case because according to the genetic diagram, there was no chance for this couple to have a child with blood group O. Or we can also, maybe if this answer is too long, you can just say the person with blood group AB cannot have a child with blood group O, or with science that is impossible unless otherwise. Now let's move on to question B. So question B here, what could have been the correct genotype of the actual father? So the key point is, we know that the mother has OO. So the father can have any blood group as long as there is at least one allele for O. So the father can be AO. Why? This O and one O from this will give us a child. Or can be BO, or can be OO. All these are answers. So the father, the key point is, there should be at least one allele for O in the father, so that there is now that chance of having a child with blood group O. Okay, now let's move on to section B. So under section B, we are told answer any 3 questions from this section. All answers must be in complete sentences and paragraphs. So I'm going to try my level best to just give you some maybe hints here and points, since I don't have enough space here. But let's just look at some of the information that we can share here. So let's look at the first question. The first question, question 6a, they want us to identify causes of infertility in human beings. So let's define, what do you think infertility is? So infertility is just a condition in which a human being cannot have kids, or we can say it's a condition in which a human being cannot conceive. So that's a key. So now, causes of infertility. This question has not specified. We don't know if it's women or if it's men. So since it's just general, we can answer any of the points that we can remember here. So causes of infertilities. Number one, we have maybe condition like damage to the fallopian tube. So any damage to the fallopian tube, though that one is from women, any damage from the fallopian tube may cause infertility. So damage to the fallopian tube. So a fallopian tube is just the tube in which mostly the fertilization process may occur, or the chances for fertilization process to occur is high. Then the other problem, we may have ovulatory problems. So ovulatory problems are problems that causes ovulation. Ovulation is just the release of a mature egg after 28 days average. Then the other, we also have conditions that affect the uterus, can also cause that. Then in a male, we may have low sperm count. So we have low sperm count. This may cause infertility. Then both in men and male, conditions like diabetes may also cause infertility. Now, after so the key point is you can just expand these points, then you are where to go. Now, apart from that, also the conditions such as epilepsy can also cause infertility. So we said, let me see if I can add this point. So here we have diabetes can also cause it. Then epilepsy, so epilepsy. Then also the other causatives of infertility, also problems with the erection in men may also cause infertility. Also sometimes the lifestyle of both men and women, such as maybe drinking alcohol, maybe also smoking tobacco and the like. So those also may cause infertility. Now let's move on to question B. So question B is describe how a healthy pregnancy could be maintained. So if we want to have if a woman wants to have a healthy pregnancy, that person must make sure that she sees a health care provided. So the first one, you see or she sees a health care provided, or who she has an appointment with. Then the second one, she needs to make sure that she eats a variety of food. Or here we are just looking at balanced diet. So she has to make sure that she has a balanced diet. Then the other thing is she needs to avoid lifestyle that involves like alcohol, caffeine, tobacco, etc. Then also she has to make sure that she gets enough rest, and also like she has to make sure that somehow she is doing some activities that will make her body to be physically active. So those are some of the points that you would expand for a person who have a health pregnancy. Now let's move on to question C. Describe safe childbirth. So if we look at safe childbirth, we are looking at the birth that itself. So we are looking at maybe here we do not have any like condition or maybe any operation. We are looking at a situation where a child or an unborn baby has a normal birth. That is the safe childbirth. So here we are just looking at having normal birth. Now let's look at question 7a. So explain the functions of the following nerve cells. So nerve cell number 1 is sensory neuron. So the sensory neuron, from the word they are sensor. So to sensor, or sensory neuron, these are neurons that transmit electrical impulses from the receptor to the central nervous system, or from the receptor to the spinal cord. Depends where the interpretation of that particular information is done. So here we can say the transportation or transmitting of electrical impulses from the receptor organ to central nervous system. If you look at the receptor organs, we are looking at organs like we have the skin. The skin receives like pain, there is that touch. Then we have the eye, which receives light. We have the tongue, which receives taste. We have the ears, which is for sound. Then we also have with this should be 5. So we have the first one, the receptor, the skin. Then we have the tongue for tasting. Then after the tongue we have the eye for seeing. Then ear for hearing. Then so we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the last one, the nose for smelling. And these are what we call the 5 senses. So all these are receptors. So these organs that you are seeing or maybe hearing, these organs, they have the function of detecting the information from the stimulus. Then after they detect information from the stimulus, then they pass on that information to the sensory neuron. Now the sensory neuron will transmit that information to the central nervous system. Then the central nervous system, here we may look at the spinal cord and the brain. So there are some of the information that are being interpreted in the spinal cord. So the spinal cord will refer to as the central nervous system. So information that are being interpreted in the spinal cord are those that are involved in spinal reflex actions that are controlled by the spinal cord. And these actions, we say they are automatic. These are actions that happens without our consent. Why? They are there to protect us from the environmental damage. Now let's look at motor neuron. So motor neuron, now it is the opposite. So these, they transmit now information that is being interpreted from the central nervous system to the effector. Now, organs that are considered as effectors are those that needs response. For example, with muscles, like if someone attaches or steps on an object that is hot, that person should withdraw the hand or leg from that hot object. So the organ that will be responsible for that movement should be muscles. So the skin will detect the information from the stimulus, which is, let's take it for instance, the fire. Then that information will be transported through the sensory neuron, from the sensory neuron into the spinal cord. Then under the spinal cord we have the relay neuron. After the relay neurons, then we have the motor. So the motor now will carry the information from the central nervous system, which is the spinal cord, to the muscles. Let's say maybe the muscles of the leg, the muscles of the hands. Then the person will be able to respond by withdrawing away from that object. Then for relay works as like a connector between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. So the function will just say connects sensory neuron to motor neuron. That is the key. Now, away from this, let's look at the B. Describe, giving examples in each case. The first one, spinal reflex actions. So these are just the actions that are controlled by the spinal cord. That's why we have the name spinal. So they are controlled by the spinal cord. Remember, these are what we call involuntary actions. Actions that takes place without our consent. Actions that does not require for us to think in order for it to happen. Why? Because these actions are there to protect us from environmental damage. Let's take for instance, you step on an object. If it were to first you think, then after you think, you see that you stepped on that, then you respond, you might find that by the time you are responding, the damage has already been done. So to avoid that, or for a quick response to protect us, we need to have some of the interpretation and the action that is done within the spinal cord, because it would have been taking time for impulses to move from, let's say, the skin of the leg up to the brain, then they interpret that, then the person responds. So that's the key about the spinal reflex actions. Now, examples of these reflex actions, we know about the knee jerk. Then apart from the knee jerk, we've looked at the one that I'm using, where you remove your hand from a hot, let's say, stove or object in order to protect yourself from being burnt or from being hurt. So that is an example. So whenever you are taught to give an example for these, you can just say a knee jerk, then you explain on that knee jerk, or you can just say removing your hand or your leg, whatever part of the body that is in contact with an object that is hot. Now let's look at conditioned reflex actions. Now these actions are acquired and learned. So we'll consider them as acquired and learned. So these actions are actions that you've just learned from the time of birth up to today. Any action that you just learned is what we call a conditioned reflex. And these actions are learned by repetition. You learn by repeating. Even with the school stuffs, like if these things that we are discussing here, we learn this by repeating. So you don't study once. You don't study a topic one day. You study. You need to study. You study. You repeat that. As long as if you keep on studying, you reach at a point where that information will be acquired and learned in you. An example: we all know our names. Why? Because we've learned that name. We've learned that my name is this. We've acquired that by repetition. How? The people surround us during our childhood were calling us names. Because of that repetition, we've come to know that this is my name. That is my mom's name, dad's name, whosoever that surrounds your name. So the key to learning is you need to repeat. You need to keep on requiring that. And one of the most point that I can get from learning is, if we look at these conditioned actions, whatever someone has learned, as long as he or she has learned, my advice is you can also learn it. All these subjects, you may see a teacher or maybe teachers solving mathematics, chemistry, biology, whatever subject. those people have just learned that. If they have learned it, you can also learn it. The key is the ability to keep on studying. You may face the ups and downs during your school study, but the key point is you keep on studying. As long as you are studying, as long as you are waking up, you study, you put in more effort, don't forget something is growing inside of you. One day it is going to show. So examples of these conditions are reflex actions. We have actions like reading. We learned reading. We all have learned. There is no one who was born like that. So reading is a conditioned reflex action, and the way we used to learn in terms of reading, it was by repeating. It wasn't a one-day thing. You read, you make mistake, you keep that. Someone is there to control you, will tell you this word should be read like this, pronunciation, stuff like that. So these are just by repetition. Then another example apart from reading is let's say driving a motor car. Driving a motor car is also a learned activity. No one was born like that. You are told to, whenever if you enter a car, you do this. You put in the key, you turn on the ignition, then from there you press the accelerator, then you do this, you move down the handbrake, stuff like that. It is a learned. Even riding a bicycle is also a conditioned reflex action. Why? We just learned it. Playing musical instruments, for those that does this, this is also a learned activity. So these are what we call conditioned reflex actions. So these are just actions that were learned by repetition. Now away from there, let's look at question 8. Question 8 here, describe the antagonistic action of muscles in the iris. So whenever we look at the iris, we are looking at the size of the pupil. So let me see if I can, if this is the size. So the size of the pupil changes depending on the amount of light. So there are two muscles that are responsible for these changes. We have these, what we call circular muscles. Then you have these are known as longitudinal muscles. Now, for a pupil to change its size, either increasing or decreasing, these two muscles must work antagonistic. What is meant by antagonistic action is an action where one muscle relaxes while the other one contract. If a circular muscle relaxes, the longitudinal must contract. Now let's take it for instance, a person moves in a room where there is dim light, or in a dark room. What happens to the pupil? So the pupil will increase in size. Why? To allow more light to enter. So if the pupil let's say dilates in size, if it increases its size, one thing you can write down there is these longitudinal muscles must contract. As they are contracting, they are coming closer to each other. As they are contracting now, it's like elastic. As they are contracting, then they are like pulling these. So as this is being pulled on each side, then we can see the picture, the size will increase. Why is the size increasing? So that we want to acquire or to collect as much light as possible we can in that dark room. So we are saying in a dark room, the longitudinal muscles will contract, then circular muscles will relax. Then the opposite is also true if a person moves in a room or place where there is light. So whenever we have enough light, the pupil must now constrict in size. It has to become smaller. Why? Since the area or the place where that person is, there's too much light. So in order to control that amount of light that will enter, the pupil must constrict. It has to become smaller so that we only have a small amount of light that should enter the eye, because if too much, it might damage the retina. Then as a result, we may have the condition of blindness. So that is what we can say about the antagonistic action of muscles. So we are saying this controls the size of the pupil. The key point is the pupil is either or depends on the amount of light. Now let's move on to question B. Compare and contrast exoskeleton and endoskeleton. So a skeleton is just a framework or something that gives the structure to an animal. Now, exoskeleton and endoskeleton, these two, the similarity, what we can compare about these two is in terms of functioning. Both exoskeleton and endoskeleton, they are used to protect some soft organs. Then another similarity that we can give between exoskeleton and endoskeleton is that these skeletons are used for locomotion. Then in terms of the differences, the difference is exoskeleton is found on the outside of the body, while endoskeleton, such as the bones, they are found inside. Thus the name endo. So the endo inside. Then the other thing is exoskeleton is made up of a material, a non-living material, what we call a kidney, while endoskeleton is made up of a living material that we call bones. Bones are living material. They are living tissues because they grow, because they benefit from the food that we eat every day. Now let's move on to C. C, we have to describe one joint disorder. So a joint disorder is a disorder that affects the joint. So one example here, we can give a gout, and gout is an example of arthritis. So a gout is where maybe the joint is swelling, there is pain or inflammation. So that is for this one. Now let's move on to question 9. Question 9a, define the term biodiversity. So biodiversity can be defined as the variety of life. So here we are looking at the total sum of life that we may have in an ecosystem. Then B, state the importance of biodiversity of organisms in an area. So biodiversity, the most important of biodiversity in an area is for the balancing of the balancing. We are looking at like one thing that we need to know about an ecosystem is made up of different organisms. Then each organism or each species has its own role to play, and we call this in ecology as ecological niche. So like even mosquitoes, I know we may see mosquitoes to a negative part because of the diseases or the issues that we face as human beings, but if we are to kill those, there is a negative, there will be an imbalance in the community. Why? There are some of the microorganisms or maybe organisms that depends on mosquitoes. So if we remove mosquitoes, there will be an area or organisms that might suffer. Then also the other thing about the importance of biodiversity, the importance of organisms, like the balancing of oxygen. We human, we depend on oxygen. We need oxygen for respiration. And where does that oxygen come from? We know that oxygen is the end product of the process of photosynthesis. So we human depends on the plants. The plants will give us the oxygen that we need. Then also the food that we eat. The human cannot produce. We do not produce our own food. Every food even those that we see in shops, they were not synthesized by human beings. As human beings, we just get things that are made, then we mix. That's not making, that's not creating. So plants are the only organisms that manufacture their own food by the process of photosynthesis. So if that biodiversity is disturbed, if let's for example we cut down trees, then we are affecting our survival as animals, human beings, whatever we are. So the importance of biodiversity is all about the balancing of what? Balancing of the life of organisms to be possible. Each organism depends on another organism. Then let's look at C. Describe the economic reasons for maintaining biodiversity. Why should we maintain? The first one, we can look at ecotourism. Biodiversity can be used as a tourism where people goes. Maybe we have some of the parks in here in Zambia. You can go there as tourism, so it can act as a source of income. So that is the economical reasons. Then apart from that, we have medicinal plants. So medicinal, we have some plants that are there for medicines. So whenever we cut down plants, we are affecting ourselves because one day you may find that there are no trees to give us that medicine. Then also animals, some animals are used as source of food. So whenever we disturb the biodiversity, we are indirectly disturbing ourselves. Then we also have like commercial hunting. Then there is also what we call sport hunting. So sport hunting is the kind of hunting where animals are being hunted not for food but just for fun. So that is also a commercial reason. Now let's look at question 10a. Explain the term population. So population refers the number of organisms of the same species of a given area. Then discuss factors that causes changes in population. We'll look at the first one. Let's look at factors that may cause the population. Let's take it for instance, if we want the population to increase. So for population to increase, if let's take it for instance here in Zambia, what two factors that makes Zambian population to increase? So the first one, we know that we have birth, where we have newborn babies. So as soon as we have new babies, the population of Zambia increases. Then the second one, we have immigration. Immigration talks about the incoming of people, where we have some people that we call foreigners. If we have people maybe comes from different countries, like if people comes from let's say Congo, South Africa, Nigeria, if those people comes in our Zambia, then the population of Zambia will increase. So two factors makes the population to increase: birth and immigration. Remember, imi from the word in, so they come in. Then also two factors will make the population to decrease. The first one, death. Whenever people die, the population decreases. Then the other one, emigration. So emigration is a condition where people moves out of your country. If for instance, maybe people want to move from Zambia maybe to a foreign country, like maybe USA, maybe Britain. So as long as if people move from Zambia to another country, the population of Zambia will decrease. So here to summarize is, whenever we are looking at the changes in population size, we are looking at factors that may cause the population to increase. We have two: birth and immigration. These two will make the population to increase. Then two factors will also make the population to decrease: death and emigration. So these are the points that I can share with you guys on this. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.